If you have journeyed with us during this past year, you know that we have gone through the book of Psalms. We have started with good Psalms, solid Psalms. Then we began to descend into more difficult Psalms. And today we are almost down to the bottom. Today we deal with the second to last depressing, upset Psalm that we're going to deal with during this series. The purpose for this journey is multifold. First of all, we would like to dispel this idea in people's minds that when we pray, all our prayers need to be neat and tidy and reverent, because the Bible gives us examples of a wide variety of prayers. Secondly, we want people to understand that God is able and willing to accept our prayers no matter what shape and form they come into. And lastly, we would like to give you examples, especially when you go through difficult times. There are prayers you can pray, and they are included there in the Bible. Which brings us to our psalm for today. Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon, is one of the known psalms, partly because of a popular song group called Boney M. That's right, in 1978. Released by the rivers of Babylon. It is also known because, have I planted a worm in your minds now? Can you hum it in your minds as we go through the service? And just in case you're too young, how did it go? That's the one. Ta-ra-pa-pam. Now that's going to stay. The second reason for which this is a known psalm is because it actually gives us the background against which it was written. The people were taken into captivity, and then in Babylon they sat there and they truly wept because life was not as good as they had hoped it would have been. Now, Psalm 137, and these are the disclaimers, is a difficult psalm because in it we have very strong emotions that are being expressed. There is upset, there is anger, there is violence in it. In actual fact, the emotions are so strong that the people refused to sing songs of worship. That's how strongly they felt about their situation. Partly because we do not have many such songs in our hymn repertoire, and partly because today we want to acknowledge, respect, and seek to better understand those who are at that point in their relationship with God. We are going to mirror their actions, and we are not going to sing any worship songs. Because there are people in our midst who will struggle to stand up and sing, given what they are going through. Just to clarify, our musicians are all here in the house. They are more than able and willing to play, but their instruments are abandoned on the platform. Today's service is an act of solidarity with those in our midst and beyond who can no longer worship as they once did because of the pain and the anger and the vengeful feelings towards the evil which befell them. We'll read Psalm 137. It's a psalm written by those who are struggling, those who feel oppressed, those who have suffered enough. It's an emotional song of sheer determination. It is a song for those people who are going through living in a world which is very against them, as it were, while hanging on to hope. They're refusing to sing in protest while being spurred on by some glimmer of hope. I would like to make this final note to begin with. I know that Psalm 137 is not everybody's psalm. However, if it is not yours, if you cannot fully identify with it, I invite you to seek to understand those who embrace it and remember it for when you might find yourself in similar circumstances. Read talks about two cities, Jerusalem and Babylon. On the one hand, Babylon is a source of grief. But what can be so wrong with Babylon? Because its inhabitants have a lot of good things to say about it. In actual fact, when the conquerors came to the gates of Jerusalem and they said to them, you have an option, you either surrender or we will take you by force. These are the words used to describe Babylon. I come and take you to a land like your own, they said. A land of grain and new wine, a land of bread and vineyards, a land of olive trees and honey. Choose life. Choose life and not death. If you ask the Babylonians about their city, they will tell you it is a wonderful city. It was one of the largest cities of its time, if not the largest. It was well known for the hanging gardens of Babylon, one of the ancient world wonders. It was known for the ziggurat which stood in the middle, Etemenanki it was called. It had 8 famous gates, one of which was redone, and it is displayed today in Berlin, the Ishtar Gate. And let us not forget that Babylon was set on the shores of 2 mighty rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And that meant commerce and water for life and agriculture and beauty and so on. So perhaps the field commander, when he came and told the Jews, please come over to Babylon by choice, he meant it when he said Babylon is a good place. What can be so bad about it that the Jews later on cry? On the other hand, you have Jerusalem, the other city. It cannot really compare with Babylon. I mean, it was a fortified city. It had a temple in the middle and a palace right there, and it had a spring flowing through the middle of it. However, perhaps what made Jerusalem very special was not its architectural achievements, but the fact that it was home. And home means a lot of good things. Home is the place where people speak my language. Home is the place where my family and my extended family live. It's the place where I know people and I share memories with them. It's the place where I grew up, I live in, and I want to continue living in. Home is the place where I know how things work, for better or worse. Home is the place when I can worship in freedom in my own church. At home, I am loved and welcomed and appreciated. I mean, Jerusalem was humble. Babylon was outstanding. Jerusalem did not compare with Babylon, but surely won the heart. Babylon was extraordinary, but it broke one's heart. Jerusalem was the humble home. Babylon was an impressive but foreign land. How was it possible for Babylon to be so bad when it looked so promising? If you read the Bible and you read the stories of Esther and Daniel and Nehemiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel, you realize that that great Babylon was filled with corruption and dirty politics, with untold idolatry, with debauchery on a different level, and above it all, coercion, cruelty, and oppression. So do you understand when the people sing or pray, we are weeping? Do you understand when they say, even though I may be sitting by the great rivers of the great Babylon, I cannot help myself but weep. I weep when I remember home, when I think of Jerusalem. Realizing that we are a very diverse church here, I work with the assumption that there are some of us who are away from home, who are exiles, who are foreigners sitting here this morning. So I would like to suggest, in order to best understand this psalm, 3 different areas in which you and I may feel like foreigners, maybe aliens, as it were, here. First of all is the political and economical exiles that we're talking about. There are some of us who, from this point of view, are foreigners in this land right now. Whether in our congregation or in our community, some people call this beautiful thing Babylon because it is a foreign land to them. There are some of us who had to make very difficult and complex decisions and choices to get here, and some faced really untold perils. Consider with me very briefly why people put themselves and their loved ones in danger to go to any of the new Babylons in our world today. Some will live because of sheer poverty. Some come to Babylon because their family now lives here. Judge them all you want, but home is where your family is. Some will seek Babylon because of conflicts, wars, and political unrest. And today, we weep with those who live in a foreign land right here in our midst. Because we know that people going through such major transitions are exposed to great dangers. They lack access to the public health system, to housing, to education and justice, and that is painful. They are forced into modern-day slavery, kidnapping and ransoms, whether it is en route to their destination or while they are there. People crossing the Mediterranean Sea, the Mexican immigrants in the United States and Canada, the Burmese woman trafficked into Thailand, Eastern European children and women trafficked here in Britain, Eritrean migrants traveling to Israel, South American convoys making their way to the USA. Our countries are their Babylons, and when they get here, they weep. They are exploited for their labor. When the minimum wage here in our country is many times more or greater than they're earning back home, they come here at the cost of being exploited, and some die on their way. In 2016, statistics indicate that there were approximately 8,000 migrant deaths, with 63% of those occurring in the Mediterranean Sea just down the road from us. For many in our society and some in our midst, this land is a foreign land. It's their Babylon. And today, we weep with them and with you by the rivers of this Babylon. There is a second way in which people become aliens, as it were, in their own surroundings, from a physical point of view. This is the second reality in which we can experience a sense of alienation. We are alien from our own bodies. Allow me to misappropriate Paul's reflection on the spiritual life to the physical life, because this is what we can say about our bodies. The things I want to do, I cannot do. And the things I do not want to do, I do end up doing. Some of us are aliens in our own bodies. In our midst today and in our extended families are those for whom their own bodies become foreign lands. There are inherited illnesses which have plagued generation after generation of good people. There are new illnesses which have never been heard of, which continue to baffle the professionals. There are illnesses which we bring upon ourselves. For some, their bodies are here, but their spirit is not. Some have fought good fights with their bodies and lost. Others are still fighting a good fight. Some of us can see the fight coming before not too long. For us and for our loved ones, our bodies are unwelcoming homes. They are our Babylons. Today, we hear the cries of those who are aliens in their own bodies, and we weep with them. There is one more group I would like to acknowledge today, which stands by the rivers of this Babylon and weeps, the spiritually disheartened. There are those in our midst which are foreigners in their own church. Sometimes they feel alienated from the church. The spirit of criticism, the spirit of intolerance, a continual threat of further division. This atmosphere of constant drama and emotional unwell makes them and makes us weep. And those rivers, which were meant to bring life, now are harbingers of death. And the people are weeping in our church. Some of our churches have lines drawn all over them, and this makes us cry too. Lines drawn between us and them. Lines drawn between people based on their culture or worship style or theology or lack of it, sexuality and gender, all in here in our church. And as a result of these lines, instead of the church being a house of prayer for all people, it has become a foreign land for many, a Babylon of a sort. And the other, inside and outside the church, they weep. And today we weep with you. To borrow a title from a book, some have become aliens in the very household of God. Today we sit and weep with you. Two cities, Babylon and Jerusalem. One was home, the other is a foreign land. And each one of us, in one way or another, experiences a bit of Babylon. And each one of us, in one way or another, contributes. And each one of us is weeping, some more openly than others. But many of us are choosing to hang up our harps, for Babylon is not our home. That is why today we stop our regular worship. We acknowledge each other's difficult realities, and we weep together. I sense that we are feeling uncomfortable already. This is not your usual service. But then again, neither are those situations that confront us. Every one of us. Earlier on, we described two different worlds. One, we constantly leave behind, and the other, though promising, provides us with a lot of pain. The people of Israel held in captivity, they respond to that new reality in a very emotional way. They sit, they weep, they hang up their harps while they remember, and then they cry out for vengeance properly. The overall atmosphere of the psalm is one of justified misery, because the psalm finds the people sitting and weeping by the rivers of misery. This is a very personal experience. There is a misconception that being a good Christian means that we have to smile a lot, we're always really nice, that we never go through really difficult times, and if we do, we must pretend that we are fine, lest someone will accuse us of having weak faith and pitying ourselves. We have equated being a good Christian with being happy all the time. I would like to suggest to you that in light of the fact that we have in the Bible Psalms like Psalm 137, we are disingenuous to ourselves and others. Perhaps because we are afraid of disappointing God by experiencing such strong emotions. Many of the Psalms, those sad and angry Psalms, are overlooked because they are authentic enough to say that very often things in life are not okay. In fact, they say that sometimes life is downright miserable. And even Christians sit and weep by the rivers of misery. Would you read it with me, please, as we reflect on the fact that it is us who go through this experience. Let's read it together. By the rivers of Babylon, we sat and remembered when we wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars, we hung our harps. For there our captors asked songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." Can you hear the grief of those who witnessed a thoughtless and arrogant enemy laugh at their God? Can you hear the sense that God has almost abandoned his people. Can you hear the humiliation of being tormented by those in power with requests of religious songs in the face of public defeat? Now, these psalms, these prayers, these songs do not invite you, the public, to evaluate them. Neither is the public allowed to pass judgment on the people who pray those prayers, because these are very personal expressions of emotions. These are prayers said by people who travel through the valley of the shadow of death. They are songs which are sung while sitting by the rivers of misery. So I ask you this morning, who may not understand or identify with these sentiments, I ask you, please, be patient with those who pray these psalms, because these songs reflect real pain and suffering, very personal grief. You read this psalm and you can sense the sentiment of anger and revenge. Listen to them. Remember, Lord, what the Edomites did on the day Jerusalem fell. Tear it down, they cried. Tear it down to its foundation. Daughter of Babylon, blessed are you, right? Doomed to destruction. Happy is the one who repays you according to what you have done to us. And the most troubling verse of this psalm, the last one. Happy or blessed is the one who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks. This is a very foreign way for us to pray. It insults our sensitivities. We seasoned churchgoers expect the psalmist to declare something to the effect of, "It is bad, but thy will be done." We expect to come to church when we go through these situations and sing, "I will trust and obey." There is no other way. After all, has Jesus not taught us to turn the other cheek to our enemies? What we find instead is an instinctively human and normal crying out to God for revenge. God, he says, don't you forget what these enemies have done to us. Don't you forget the way in which have teared down that which gave us security, our home, our Jerusalem. Then the writer turns to Babylon, to his enemies, and he says, "Babylon, you devastator. Look at what you have done to us. Happy will be the people who one day will conquer you and throw your little babies to the ground, breaking their heads open against the rocks." We shudder when we read these prayers in the Bible. First of all, the violence of the image of children having their heads dashed against the rock, that's horrific. And secondly, this obsession with revenge. What's with all of that? And I wonder in my own mind if this doesn't perhaps remind us of just how rebellious our own feelings can become when we hit trouble. This is not a noble prayer. People respond to these kind of psalms in two different ways. First of all, they find these psalms too offensive to be included in the Bible, and for that reason, they ignore them completely. The other extreme is when people read these psalms and they use them as justification for acting out in anger towards other people. And neither of these two extremes are, I believe, biblically sound. There are different ways to understand these prayers. First of all, these prayers were written in the context of war. The little ones represented the future of an oppressive empire. Part of the hope at the end of the psalm is that this oppressive injustice of that empire will see no future, but it will come to an end. That's what they were trying to say. There is a different way to look at it, and that is, unless you express your emotions raw as they are freely, you cannot make room for hope. In order for hope to emerge, one has to sense the freedom that I can share exactly how I feel with God. Whether those sentiments are grief or pain or vengeance or anger. For hope to be hope and to emerge, it requires that miserable background. Only then hope is actually hope. The third way to look at this psalm is as a bold act of faith, because it names the pain and then it takes it to God. There is very strong anger in this psalm. However, it is important for all of us to understand that there is no suggestion in this psalm that any action will be taken against the little ones in Babylon by the people who pray. The action to put right the wrongs is left entirely and confidently with God. This is an act of faith in God. Israel has faith. They trust God by expressing their pain and their misery, and they trust Him enough to know that He will hear, He will remember, and He will do something about it. When we hand the issue over to God, no matter how dirty and miserable it is, we make space for two things. First of all, for memory. We remember how miserable life is, but also for hope. We trust that God will do something about it. Now, I know it's difficult for us who live in comparable ease to fully understand the strength and courage required to express this personal level of frustration publicly. It's difficult to see how such a psalm fits in with the Christian faith. And yet, God gives us permission to sit by the rivers of misery and weep and pray these kind of prayers. God makes room for this strong and emotional language required to express our irreverent feelings. When you and I pray these prayers, we begin to sense freedom. The freedom which comes for praying out loud the anger and the vengeance and the frustration. And slowly as we express it, we make room for hope. I want us to feel comfortable today, especially if you're going through these experiences of alienation, that God understands, welcomes honest and open talk. And it is only when we are authentic with Him that He can truly engage with us. So today, in solidarity with those who are exiles and who suffer, we weep with you and we say your prayers because God accepts your prayers. So far, we spoke of two cities and about the permission to share our emotions to God as they are. Then right there in the middle, there is this segment which talks about music. There, our captors asked us for songs. Our tormentors demanded songs of joy. They said, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." And we asked ourselves, how can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? We are told in these verses progressively that the music they were asked to sing were songs of joy, songs of Zion, songs of the Lord. In other words, they were asked to sing worship music, music which captures people's hopes and fuels their faith. But they said that music had to stop for a while in order for them to publicly weep before God. So in this context of sheer misery, they ask, how can I sing of the Lord in Babylon? Theirs is a rhetorical question. In other words, they already imply the answer. I cannot sing songs of the Lord given where I am. However, how about us? Is it ever possible to sing of the Lord while in Babylon? Now, I acknowledge that there is a risk of losing the seriousness of this psalm by talking about hope far too early. We trivialize it if we jump very quickly into hoping. However, I believe there are three reasons for which I feel this will be appropriate. First of all, we have a heritage. The people of God have spiritualized the Jerusalem spoken of in these Psalms of restoration. For them, Jerusalem is no longer an earthly place or a place to come back to, but a new reality. You're familiar with that Bible text which describes this Jerusalem that people hang on to, that holy city which was coming down out of heaven from God. And he heard it declared, look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people. God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. For the people of God, Jerusalem has become a symbol of restored home. Because politically, in this new Jerusalem, people's identity is given by them belonging not to a land, but to God himself. And that citizenship cannot be taken away by anyone. Physically, in this new Jerusalem, people's bodies will not become prisons, for they will stand in the very presence of God, of life itself. Bound to life. In this new Jerusalem, the people of God will see him as he is without the need for broken go-betweens. So is it possible to sing of the Lord while in Babylon? If we are true to the Christian heritage, I believe it is. Louisa Fletcher Tarkington wrote the following: I wish that there was some wonderful place called the land of beginning again, where all our mistakes and all our heartaches and all of our poor selfish griefs could be dropped like a shabby old coat at the door and never be put on again. I believe the people of God have spoken of a land of beginning again throughout. It's quite a journey to it. For some, a very long journey, and getting there will not be easy for everybody. The land of beginning again is the place where God will put right all the wrongs of our current circumstances. Today, we can acknowledge that that land of beginning again is different for different people, but it is real. So is it ever possible to sing of the Lord while in Babylon? I say today it is. Because the people of God have always spoken and sung about it. The second reason for which I believe it is possible to sing of the land of beginning again, of the new Jerusalem, is because while people in pain weep by the rivers of misery, I have an opportunity to do something. There are those amongst us, there are those in our families who are struggling big time. But that doesn't mean I should stop, because I can do something about it. I'm reminded of what Jesus said to people of his time. He said, there are those who are struggling. There are those who are hungry. There are those who are thirsty. They are the strangers. There are those who are naked. There are those who are in prison. There are people who are weeping and crying. But while they weep, the rest of us can sustain that hope for them by doing something. After all, this is not a despairing psalm, because hope is resilient. And for this reason, we can sing Babylon. And thirdly, we can sing because hope requires commitment. It requires sheer determination. Here it is expressed in the psalm. If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. A people that is struggling is not afraid to wish for something better. In fact, that is their calling. They are stubborn people of faith. And once we commit to hoping, our capacity to endure, to maintain this identity is strengthened. We choose to look for a new Jerusalem. So is it ever possible to sing of the Lord while in Babylon? It is, as long as one has the strength to commit to that hope. And when they do not, the rest of us shall humbly hum and actively do something about it. Today, in solidarity with those who are weeping in this land, we want you to know that God hears your cries and is not ashamed or afraid of your strong emotions. God sees and knows your troubles. A land of beginning again is coming. If you struggle to hold on to any hope, God is here in your pain. And if we can do something to support, we shall stop singing our regular worship songs for a while and listen to you and cry with you and perhaps be allowed to do something about it.